Hi everyone, and welcome to Wordsmiths. My name is Jenna, and here we talk about elements of storytelling to help you with your own creative writing projects. Today's topic is character roles and depth. Some of this may be familiar, but some should be new to you, and that's what we'll focus on. While you look over these terms, let me say a character is a great place to start when working on a story. We need someone to latch onto and guide us through it. I don't want to overwhelm anyone, so we'll be drawing examples from a single series, Avatar: The Last Airbender. Hopefully you're all familiar with it, and if you're not, I highly recommend it. A protagonist is the number one character. It's pretty easy. In Avatar, it's Aang. A term you probably don't know is deuteragonist. This is a character who's the second most important. They're vital to the main character's journey in some way, kind of like a sidekick, but more important. They can have their own problems and plot lines. If a book is written with multiple points of views, those characters are deuteragonists or even tritagonists, and further on down the Latin prefixes. Because Katara is important to Aang's personal journey as his love interest, one could argue she's the deuteragonist. Zuko is also a contender since his destiny is closely entwined with Aang's all the way to the end, and personally I favor Zuko as the deuteragonist. Someone could also argue that after Aang, it's an ensemble cast, since the main players are all important to the story's end goal and Aang's journey. Antagonist is also easy, any character who works against the protagonist. It's mainly Azula. Fire Lord Ozai is the ultimate villain. Zuko's an antagonist on and off for a while. An anti-hero, though, is a character who lacks common heroic traits, such as morality, courage, kindness, or idealism. They can do good, but not necessarily for the right reasons, because they mostly act out of self-interest. Jet is an anti-hero from the beginning. He fights against the Fire Nation but doesn't care about civilian casualties. He's motivated by personal hate because the Fire Nation killed his family, and despite wanting to start fresh in Ba Sing Se, he can't let that bias go. However, he ultimately helps Aang and company at Lake Laogai, so there's some good and some not so good. Next, a confidant or mentor is just like the word. Aang has Avatar Roku, and Zuko has Uncle Iroh. A foil has traits that contrast the protagonists. They provide opposing views and/or actions that create conflict. Often, the antagonist is a foil to the main character. Azula is cold, manipulative, and arrogant, as opposed to Aang's kindness, modesty, and belief in nonviolence. Love interest also easy, Katara for Aang. There's several for Sokka, her brother. But there's a type of love interest I want to share with you called a manic pixie dream girl, or boy. It's a trope love interest designed to teach protagonists to live life to the fullest. They're quirky and charismatic and have strange beliefs or habits without much reason behind them. It's actually a negative term. It came from a film critic. It implies that the character doesn't have much development or agency, and they're just there to enrich the protagonist's life, hence dream. It's basically saying the writer was lazy designing this love interest. That doesn't mean you can't have a love interest who's quirky like this and brings light to the protagonist's life. Just be sure you make them a strong character and give them a backstory and have them take actions and goals of their own. If they have a weird habit or belief like not wearing socks on Tuesdays, let the protagonist find out why. There's also a type of love interest called a femme fatale. This is a beautiful woman who uses her feminine strengths for her own ends. They're usually intelligent, manipulative, mysterious, and powerful types who pose a threat to or can lead to the protagonist's demise. Jet is set up like a femme fatale, or rather homme fatale, because he's male. He ends up threatening her moral integrity. Secondary and tertiary characters reoccur and can support the support or affect the plot, but tertiary ones are a little more like fillers that populate the story's world. Tylee and May, Azula's right-hand girls, come up pretty often, so they're secondary. A character like June shows up 2 or 3 times, so she's tertiary. Stock characters are stereotypical because it's a type, a little more of a type than a role. It's a type that we've seen before, but they can become unique. You might think Iroh, when he's first introduced, is just a stock wise old man character, but he becomes more developed as the show goes on as well. He has a lot more to offer than just wisdom. A symbolic character represents a concept or theme in the story. I'd say Azula and Zuko are symbolic of indoctrination from sociology and nature versus nurture from psychology. They were raised in the same household, had the same parents, but became drastically different because a person's influences matter. Azula mostly had their father's guidance and approval, which helped indoctrinate her into the imperialist vision he has about their right to rule the world as royalty, and more importantly, Fire Nation royalty. Zuko had their mother's and Uncle Iroh's guidance and support, plus his banishment from the nation, which forced him to see other perspectives and options. In a nutshell, Azula's character warns the audience how a lack of healthy social nurturing can lead a person to act with beliefs like fear and power is the only way to get respect and keep people's loyalty, and this leads her down a path of ruin. Now, roles can overlap if you've noticed. Deuteragonists are often confidants or foils. Love interests can be foils or antagonists. Enemies to lovers, ring a bell? Opposites attract? Antagonists can even switch to the protagonist side. Shout out to Zuko. Nothing is set in stone. Great characters are complex, and their interactions even more so. Roles are arguable and can change, and even if you can't fit characters to these terms, that's okay too. Next is level of depth. There are 2 sides here. First, the internal. A character can be static or dynamic. A static character isn't changed by the story. They don't have any kind of personal revelations by the end. Tylee is pretty static. She has her skill set, and despite betraying Azula during the Boiling Rock prison arc, it didn't reflect a change in character. She was never really on Azula's side, nor did she seem against the protagonist's side. By the end, she doesn't experience personal growth like many of the other characters do. Dynamic characters do change. They learn something, gain new qualities, or change their perspective on the world. Zuko is the clearest example of a dynamic character in this series. He goes from angry and confused to clear-headed and independent. He liberates himself when he starts taking actions that help him realize he doesn't need his father's acceptance. He can set his own path. On the external side, we have flat and round. A flat character is someone we don't know much about. They have 1 or 2 traits and are pretty one-dimensional. A round character is someone who we get to see multiple sides of their personality, their views, their backstory, those kind of details. There are a lot of characters in Avatar that are rounded. Usually you see dynamic round characters and static flat. Protagonists should always be round, and they're often dynamic. But there's static round too. I considered Tylee a static round character. She has emotional depth, and we learn about her family. Suki is also static round. Despite not knowing her backstory, we see multiple sides of her personality throughout her time in the group as Sokka's love interest. The one combination I highly doubt can exist is dynamic flat. Readers wouldn't buy a major change in a character that doesn't have much depth to begin with. You can lose your audience's trust by making a shallow character do a 180. For example, Aang's friends don't trust Zuko at first when he approaches the team to help because their understanding of him is shallow or flat. It takes time for them to believe he's changed. Another point I'd like to make is that the more you learn about a character, the more they might seem dynamic, but they're actually becoming rounded. There's an episode where Avatar Roku explains his past with Sozin, which might make you think he's dynamic, but in the current story, his beliefs and views remain steady. His character doesn't change. And time for prompts. This first one I have, think on your favorite book or the one you're currently reading and identify what purpose each character serves. Why were they written the way they were? Which are you drawn to and why? If you have a story idea you're excited about, take a closer look at your characters, especially your protagonist, and see how you might make them more effective by applying the concepts we talked about, as far as roles and depth. For example, if you've got two characters that play kind of the same role for your protagonist, it might be more effective to cut one out and focus on making the other character stronger. If you have a character whose use feels weak except for 1 or 2 points, maybe you can make them stronger by creating more of a role for them. Don't be afraid to change some things if it'll make your story stronger. Now this kind of prompt is pretty fun. These are some first lines that you can use to develop a story where the main character is round and dynamic. Try to include at least 2 other characters with roles that we talked about. If you really want to challenge yourself, try to make one that takes on more than one role. That's all today. Until next time, keep reading and stay inspired.